Hello everyone. So I'm back with another game of mine. So in this video we'll discuss the game number 4 which was played on day 2 of the first rank Banglore Grandmaster tournament. You might have noticed unlike the first day where I made all the games in a single video, I'm making videos for each game separately. This is because I believe the games played on the second day were more complicated, and hence I want to spend more time analyzing each game, and I don't want to stretch the video very long. So let's go ahead and start analyzing the fourth game. So in my fourth game, I was playing from black against Adya Raghunath, and she was a very small girl, I think 9 or 10 years old, but she played extremely well. She was very well prepared in the opening, and honestly, I am not very sure what was the turning point. I think she misplayed the end game in somehow, and I got some chances to counter and maybe gain a few points. And at the end, we had a Lucena position, which again, most people would say it does not happen in real games, but I have played Lucina a few times. So let's get started. So she played e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. So this is called the Italian opening, and I have been playing this opening from over 15 to 16 years. So I'm very familiar with it. And I would say at a certain point I was aware of all the possible variations and what moves to play. But again, I have been a bit out of touch. She played c3, knight f6, d4. So and I played captures, and she played e5. So generally in this variation, the I have seen most players play cd4, bishop b4. There's a trap variation with knight c3, but that is not good for white. The best move is bishop d2, and after some exchanges, and black can actually try for a draw with knight c a5, queen a4, knight c6, queen b3 type of repetition, or if black wants to play for a win, they can continue with knight e7. And then followed by c6, where white will have this isolated d pawn. So white will try to have a better middle game where white pushes for an attack, but if all the pieces are exchanged, you would have an isolated pawn, and that would become a weakness. So if black manages to exchange pieces, it would be a better endgame for black, but in the middle game, white would be pressing. So that is how generally it's played. And here she played e5, and I had seen this variation before. I knew that there is d5 coming, and but I was not sure whether this was knight e4 and d5 or it was directly d5. So I tried calculating, and this is one of the mistakes I did was, even though I calculated that d5 is fine and knight e4 is not very certain, I still went with knight e4. And this is something I have told my students many times, that do not look how beautiful or how safe a move looks, but rather look at what is the position that's coming out of it, or what your calculation says. And in this game, I'm guilty of making that mistake. I had calculated d5, pawn takes knight, pawn takes bishop, pawn takes rook, rook h6, and then pawn takes here, and bishop b4 check, bishop d2. And this was what I had calculated. And I thought this should be fairly equal. White has an extra pawn, but I'll get that back. but somehow was not comfortable with the idea of this pawn being on g7. And when I look at the computer analysis, it's actually saying it's good for black. So after c takes d4, oh yes, I can just capture this pawn, and I will then gain back this pawn. So yeah, I should have tried that. Uh, that was a bad decision, I would say. Let's look at this variation a bit in depth. What if bishop b5? Oh, then knight e4. Yeah, I knew knight comes to e4. I just was not sure when, and maybe then we play bishop b6 shape, and yeah, just exchange pieces, and it's kind of an equal game. Bishop d2, just trade the knights and bishops and castle. It should be fairly equal. So I knew knight e4 was an option, but again, I just didn't know the timing. Initially, I had calculated knight e4 and then queen e2 variations, but the knight e4, let's say queen e2 adds in d5, pawn captures d5, and bishop f5. So this looked okay to me. Rather, I would say my position is uh, computer says it's slightly advantageous. I would also agree to that. I feel my pieces are more active, and while the white pieces are more sitting in. So this was what I had calculated, and I had completely missed this move that my opponent played, bishop d5. And now I see my knight does not actually have any good squares. These two squares are controlled by the pawn, and this g5 is controlled by both the bishop and knight. So, and I cannot move to c5, c3, d2, f2, or g3 because they are either controlled by white or my own piece is there. So my knight is trapped and I cannot play d5 now because the bishop is sitting on d5. So I played, I had thought of knight f2, which the computer is showing knight f2, king f2, pawn c3, king. Okay, I thought of king f1, king g3, just too bold. And I still felt like I'm having three pawns for a piece, but it's too early in the game and I might. And these bishops, they just seem too open. There is actually an opening where, let me show you, where this kind of bishops true strength come where white just gives up pawn after pawn. And in this opening, actually, white gives up two pawns to achieve this bishop pair and still has a very strong attack. And you can see this even after though white is two pawns down, white is still okay. And in the game, what I had calculated here so after bishop takes b2, it would still be the same position with the same bishop setup. And I would not have extra pawns, but rather I would have three pawns for a piece. So I thought this would be really bad for me, and I don't think I can come back from it. So after bishop d5, I played f5 to support the knight, and I was thinking more like maybe if she captures, then I capture, and when the knight moves back, I capture. And maybe it will be an equality. That was what I was hoping for, but she played again the best moves. She takes bishop b4, knight d2. So here I was a little bit believed. I was thinking she would play bishop d2, knight d2, knight d2. And, and after all these exchanges, I think her queen is coming in. Knight g5 is actually a threat. But with knight d2, I do not have to capture the knight because if it would be the bishop would actually be attacking my bishop. So I either had to protect my bishop or defend. I had to react to it. But with knight d2, I do not have to react to this move. The knight cannot capture my knight because it's pinned to the king, and my bishop is like I can do something else rather than reacting. So I played d6, opening trying to open up my bishop. And you can see I cannot castle because g8 is controlled by the bishop. So I was thinking maybe I can just develop my b- queen and bishop and castle on the queen side, because we can notice most pieces are currently in the center. So if my king is stuck in the center, it would surely get attacked. And of course, after castling rook e1 would also be a very strong threat. So my opponent castled after d6. I now the knight can capture my knight. So I thought instead of waiting for them to do something, let's just exchange pieces. And this is also a good practice that when you are under attack, try to exchange as many pieces as possible so that your opponent does not have sufficient pieces to attack you with. And d takes e5 again. I had thought bishop c6, but somehow I hope that my opponent would be pawn takes e5. Pawn takes e5, the knight moves back. Yeah, I had seen this as well, and again I thought I was okay. Even though computer says it's much better for white, I still feel white needs to prove the advantage, because I can play the bishop, do long castling, and I don't see how white can prove her advantage. But she played again the best move. Kudos to her to capture my knight first. And the objective of this move is that now the pawns are weak, so they will always be on a target. And you can see after the knight captures the pawn, this pawn is already a target. And I did not want to give up a pawn, so I tried defending it. And see again, I could have castled and moved my king out and gave up the pawn, but I thought let's try to defend it. I had also thought of queen to d6, but I thought after rook a c1, bishop b7, trying to defend the pawn, um, knight c4, queen d5, and rook e1. I just didn't think this was a good enough position. With queen d5, I always have after bishop b7 c5, and there will be a checkmate attack. So I felt queen d5 was a better move, but I had also seen that queen b4 can come and stop castling, and she did that. But I thought after a5, I'll have some space, and she still blocked me from castling. But I still went ahead with the plan. The idea is I can play c5, and there's a checkmating attack. She played rook f e1, and now if I play e5 to do this checkmate attack, then knight f3 is a check, a discovered check, and after king d1, I just thought she can capture the pawn directly, or like the computer suggests, the rook can come in and capture. So again, no, things are not looking good for me. So I did long castling, knight f3, and now again I cannot play c5 because the rook will come in. And I also noticed that the seventh rank is open, the fifth rank is open. So I had to fight for this open file. And with bringing my rook to the open file, we are equally now fighting. So the rook cannot directly now jump in as freely. Rook is c1, trying to put more pressure on my double pawn. Queen b5. So the idea of queen b5 is maybe I can play queen a4 and try some exchanges, because as I mentioned, if your opponent is attacking or pressing you, the best strategy is to exchange as much pieces without compromising your pawn structure, so that you have some chances in the end game. H3, and I just exchanged the rooks, and offered to exchange queens, which she accepted, and I felt like she should have kept the queens if she was playing for a win. Queen e3 or queen d3, I felt both of those moves would have given her some chances, much better chances. But maybe she was afraid of to lose this b3 pawn, but I think that should have been okay. A queen can come here or can give a check and capture everything. So, but my opponent exchanged the queens after queen b4. Queen captures b4, a captures b4, rook e7, and at this point I thought, mm, I, this moves looks okay. Trying to open my rook, like capture the knight, double the pawns, open the rook, but I thought with rook d7 also I can save my pawns. And see, I thought maybe since she was low rated, she might actually go for a draw. And I didn't want to do a draw, but I didn't see a better way out. But again, kudos to her fighting spirit, because I've seen a lot of young kids when they're playing with older people or much higher rated players, they start offering draw or thinking of combinations to lead to draw. And here my opponent had a sure shot draw, but she didn't accept. She still decided to fight with rook e3. So again, really great fighting spirits from her. Rook d5. I was planning to play something like rook a5 and see what happens. She played rook b3, rook b5. I could have directly played rook a5, but I just wanted to see what how she would continue. Knight e5, rook a5. After knight d3, so my issue was that my bishop didn't have a way out. c5 was a possibility, but then knight controls the c5 square. So I moved the bishop to this a6 diagonal, a6 f1 diagonal to make some room so that the bishop will have some squares to control. So uh, this is again some wild guess, but during the game I kind of tried finding why she played rook b3, and I thought her plan was to just bring the rook to e3 and try to checkmate, because kind of I am having a backrank weakness. But I also noticed that whenever she played the rook to e3, I can play king d8, rook a1 check, king h2, rook d1. So I thought I have been reacting to her threats. Maybe there's a possibility I should also put some threats on her. And you can see the weaknesses that white have her are her two isolated pawns. So I started attacking her weakness. So again, whenever you want to find a way to counter attack or find a way to put pressure on your opponent, always try to pinpoint some weaknesses and attack those weaknesses. She played rook f3. So if I take her weak pawn, she can take my connected pawn. So I had to defend my pawn with g6. And here I was thinking she would play g4. And if she plays g4, I cannot capture this pawn because rook f8 would be a checkmate. So I had to play something like king d8, and this would be the position. So I cannot capture this pawn because the knight, there was a fork. So king e7, and eventually I think I captured this pawn, and still it would be okay. So I had calculated till this point, and I felt her pawns are also isolated, and the knight does not have a good square to return, so I should be okay. But she didn't play g4, she played rook f4, defending the pawn. And I think here she was more active, and now she is taking a more passive stance, which is not a good strategy. King d8, g4, and here I do not have to be scared of rook f8 mate, because my king now has the e7 square to move. So I captured the her pawn, and he captured back, and king e7. I feel this rook is slowly becoming more and more inactive now. All the squares are being controlled by my pieces. So king g3, trying to bring my bishop to the longer diagonal as well as restrict the rook even more. King h4. I think her plan was to just come in and try to grab some pawn or put the king on g7 and try doing some kind of attack. So I didn't again want to allow any chances for her to attack. So I played h6 and stopped the king from moving forward, and she moved the king back. Now, if we look at this position and this position, it's the same position for white, but my bishop has moved and so has my pawn. So it's kind of my opponent, because it didn't consider me defending the threat, gave me two extra moves. So again, as a rule of thumb, whenever you are playing a move, it should have an objective. Also, along with that, you should ensure that you are making, even if your plan does not work or your opponent finds a way to stop your plan, you should not lose moves, or your pieces should not become worse. Your piece should improve, as well as their objective might or might not be met. So you have to take care of both these factors. Bishop d5, putting the bishop on the longer diagonal, and here she played f3. Now I noticed I can attack the rook, and when the rook moves out, I can grab a pawn. So I did that. Just grab a pawn, f4. And again, I thought if I exchange here, my pawns are doubled. Even though I have an extra pawn, it would still be a draw. And I tried finding some other ways to put pressure, and I came up with this move. So the thing is, I cannot give a check here because the knight is there. So I thought maybe I'll attack the knight. When the knight moves, I attack the pawn, and then if she defends the pawn, I can give a check and capture this pawn. So I played rook c4 and she played knight d3. The other options that she had, I thought of this sacrifice, piece sacrifice as well. And I noticed that if I take, then she takes, and it will be difficult to stop these pawns. And you can see, if I try to stop the pawns, I might actually lose my pawns. So I had seen this, but I thought anyways I can stop those pawns. Maybe I can figure out some other way, but this is sacrifice. Like, it was not winning. I had chance to stop it. The other parts, the knight can move. Okay, knight cannot move there because of the rook. Let's say knight a6 or b7. Then the knight is just too far, and after rook b5 or knight a6 and bishop d6, I think I have much better position. King d6, yes. So knight d3 by her, and I played bishop d5. So I had calculated rook e4, then I can play king f6, and if the knight moves somewhere, I'll capture with a check. King captures, I remove my bishop, and it's a discovered check. And when the king moves away, I can capture the rook. So I had also calculated this variation knight e5 rook. So I can capture the rook, but I don't. What my calculation was, bishop captures, knight captures. I capture the pawn with a check. King captures. I move my bishop back, and the knight moves to d3. Again, I'll have an extra pawn. but double pawns. And my opponent can give up. These pawns will be exchanged in the end game that resulted in the position I described. So it would be one pawn versus two pawns and knight versus bishop. So the knight can be sacrificed for both the pawns or one of them and then exchange the other pawn. So it would be more simpler to draw. So I saved the rook with rook b4, knight g6 check. I thought of king e6, but I thought felt like knight f8, and there is this chance of repetition. And if I move the king away, then I'm losing the h6 pawn. Okay, I had missed king e7. I didn't realize that with after king e7, I'm gaining this piece. So that is the reason I played king e8 after knight g6. Rook e5 check, king moves f5, and I if I capture this pawn, I lose my bishop. But the thing is, if I capture this pawn with a check, then my opponent does not cannot capture my bishop. So first I gave a check, and you can see the king cannot move forward, so the king has to move back. And once the king moves back, I captured the pawn, and it was a check. Now again the king moved. I saved my bishop. He gave a check, and king f6. So it even though my king does not have any squares to move because of her pieces, I still feel it's very safe. She does not have a third piece to give a check. If there was a third piece that could have given a check to my king, it would have been checkmate immediately. Rook captures c7, then again I started giving checks. So my thought was I have to capture one of these pawns or push this pawns. Pushing this pawn, it felt very difficult without the king's help. But I thought if the king is far away from this pawn, I can capture her. So if I wanted to see how would she defend the checks, if she moves backwards, maybe then I can start supporting the pawn to push it forward. And if she moves on the other side, trying to attack my rook, then I can capture the pawn. So she came this direction, I gave a check, and then I played rook g3, and you can see this pawn is lost. King captures. So before capturing, I had to calculate a little bit on what would be the resulting position because knight e7 had a fork and the rook also supported this pawn. So if I lose the pawn and exchange the knight for the bishop, I noticed that my king would be on f5. So there was I somehow felt that there was a chance that we might come up with a Philidor's position where the king can come in and block my king from moving forward and it would be a draw. But then I noticed we can still have a Lucena position. So Lucena is a rook and pawn versus rook where the rook and pawn can win, and Philidor's is the draw position. Maybe I can do a separate video on those end games. So I captured the pawns, he gave a check, I moved to e4, she captured on c6, I captured, she captured, and here actually we had completed 60 moves. So I think I had made a mistake. So I had just written the move one square down. So that this was the end of my score sheet. So I had written my moves on the other score sheet, but I kind of lost it. So this is more from what I would be playing from my memory. So I think here I had two options, rook f4 and king f3. Rook f4 just to ensure that the king cannot come to this file, but I think after king e2, even my king cannot move forward. And if I play something like king f5, this rook will come down and it would start giving checks, and I would not have a space to hide. So king f3, I think she played rook c1. If she plays rook f3 check also, I'll just move forward and you can see her own king guards my king. and later I can play rook e2, and this is the typical fiddler where my king and pawn would be on one side, and the rook would cut her king off to support or block my pawn. Rook c1, rook f4, again trying to cut that king. Rook f1 check, and again if she captures, this is clearly winning. And with the king controlling this key square and these two squares, the pawn cannot be stopped if it's exchanged. They move back. I played g4. This might not be the best accurate representation because I'm again um, trying to play these moves from memory as I had lost the second score sheet. But I think this is how a theoretical Lucena position is. So I pushed my pawn forward. King came to attack my rook. I gave a check. King moved the rook back. The rook tried to attack my pawn, and here I give a check so that the king had to move a square back. And I can play king h2 or king f2, and it's the same idea that when the rook gives a check, I play my king forward, and if the rook attacks my pawn, then I move my pawn forward. And here she played king d4, attacking my rook. I played rook h5, king f3, and king h7, king f2. Now I could have queened, and if the rook captures, I can give a check and capture the rook. But I thought we have already played like a Lucina position. Maybe I should give the final check in the similar way and just finish it off. I queened. She gave a check. King again check. See, again gave a check. If I move my king in this position, if I cannot move my king the other way, and if I try to move my king forward, oh, oops, sorry, then I would lose my queen. And so maybe her hope was that I'll just keep on moving my king between h2 g2, but my king had this h1 square to hide, and after the check I played queen h2 and I can give up my queen for the rook, and my opponent continued till I checkmated her with the rook, but I'll not go and try to replay all those moves. I think in that game we played about 100 moves. So, but again, checkmating with rook is very theoretical and straightforward. So I would not go into it. So I hope you liked my fourth game. Again, show some love and support for Adya because I am very sure she will become a very strong player soon and maybe win some medals for India. If you have ever played with a small kid and lost your game, do mention that story as well. It would be a good read. Again, if you like the video, do like and subscribe to our channel.